So I just returned last night from 5 nights in Florida. It's where my dad and his wife live and where we gathered with our two sons, Quentin and Corbin, and our older son's girlfriend, Emily. We spent a week together with part of the family in an Airbnb. Those first few mornings of our stay, I woke up early and I read for a half hour. I spent 15 minutes journaling and put a few notes about the prior day down on a piece of paper. This is my regular morning routine. 5 or 6 years ago, I realized I wasn't reading anything outside of what I needed for ministry, and I was watching Linda, my spouse, and her parents passing books back and forth to each other, and I just totally felt out of the loop. And I think more curiously, I felt envious and even irritated at them because I wasn't part of it. And so although I was an English major in college, I didn't really discover the true joy of reading books until I was actually able to select them on my own versus having them assigned to me. And watching myself and how cranky I was with those book exchanges going on, I realized that I needed to find a way to get reading back into my life with pleasure. So I decided to begin each day with a half hour of reading, and I literally sit with my cup of coffee and my timer and my puppy and give myself a half hour on virtually every morning to just read whatever book I am reading. And it's hard for me to express what this has done for my own groundedness and centering. It's as if I kind of begin each morning with a gift to myself. I find that I'm constantly amazed at people's ability to write. I do not understand it. I love to see how they create characters, and I love to see the stories and the images, and I find that I leave my time of reading feeling like I went somewhere else for a while or into somebody else's mind or heart. It feels like a total gift. I also have this little book. This is my second one. It's called Living Well One Line at a Time, and it just has empty years. This is 5 years for each book. And so each day I just take time to reflect on the day prior. I've been doing this for 9 years, and sometimes I look back with total amazement at what took place in the years before, but mostly I just have this practice of thinking back on the past day and making some notes. I don't know about you guys, but life seems to fly by, and somehow by just noting for a moment, nothing too complex, it helps me notice what's going on in my life and in the lives of others. And more recently, after taking a weekend workshop on writing, I've started to journal for 15 minutes a day. This is a practice that I've kind of done periodically throughout my lifetime, just never consistently. I'm making no promises that it will be consistently now. My friend Judy, who I walk with regularly, suggested that I buy some color gel pens. So each paragraph in my journal is now colorful, which I don't know why, but that seems to add something happy too. I don't understand some of these sort of psychological tricks to engage ourselves in things. But now my journal looks super colorful with every paragraph being a different color, and it gives me something to think about as I'm moving to my next paragraph. And then, as many of you probably know, I have a practice of walking for an hour every weekday morning. I walk with friends and colleagues. I have 4 regular walking partners who I line up with the same day each week. And I have my mentee who is a minister in what's called preliminary fellowship, and I walk with her every other Tuesday. This practice has evolved into a deep sense of mutual friendship with these people. Each friend and I share equally. We sort of time a half hour going there and a half hour back, so you usually get your half hour to either listen or be listened to. And I feel like, although I started this really around fitness, that really what I have discovered is it has become much more important for my spirit. I struggle with some mild depression, and though meds help, there is no substitute for me than to be like out and moving and in conversation and out in nature, watching the snow and the ice and the trees and neighbors. So as I reflect with you upon these practices, I just hope you can see how each one sort of feeds a different part of me. You may also notice how, for me, I front load them all into the beginning of the day. That both gives me a way to start kind of more grounded and with personal fulfillment. And I do realize that this is a huge luxury. Like for some of you, you may have to wake up in the wee hours to pull off what I pull off in the morning. But I do know myself well enough to realize, like, if I don't do it in the morning, it's not going to happen. I will not stop in the middle of the day. So as Diana shared this month's theme is finding your center. And today we thought we'd focus on finding our own centers. One of the things that this faith and this community teaches and supports is finding our individual and our communal paths to groundedness and centering and reflection, and to a connection to your own inner wisdom or that of something greater than ourselves. So mostly we'll reflect on individual practices, but I also just wanted to call out the practice of what's happening here this morning. I know that prior to being a minister, I was a UU congregant for a long time in St. Paul, and Sunday services were like the one predictable time of the week. I had kids back then. They were young and then aged, but we had kids. You in the back may understand such things. And honestly, it was the only time I could guarantee that I could feel a sense of inner peace and groundedness. I could hear music. I could sit in silence, hear the prayers and the words, and practice sitting still with others. And it felt like more than just a habit or an obligation. It was, and it continues to be, a source of spiritual centering that I can count on each week. So I have in my home library, now that we don't have a building, a section that focuses on spiritual practices, and a lot of them are very explicit. They come from specific traditions, and then others that are more UU tend to be more open, more eclectic perhaps. I really appreciate how our faith tradition has like no one single way to practice spirituality or to engage in spiritual kind of mindfulness. It may mean that there's a place where you feel in the zone, or you feel like you can let go, or you feel like you're connected to the holy or the universe or God, or when you do something for yourself that takes you away from busyness and stressors that is uniquely yours. We're not prescribing anything, although I'm always happy to sit and make suggestions. I know that when I was in Florida, I was listening to podcasts, and every podcast about this past year used that word that we've heard quite a bit, which is the liminality word. So it still feels like we are coming out of several years of this really odd liminal time. And I know that for me, when time feels weird, it's a good time to work on spiritual practices, even if you can only do it for that period of time. I actually just would call this time not so much liminal as ungrounding or disorienting, maybe concerning or precarious or even frightening on occasion. It's been a humdinger of a couple of years. And honestly, there's no way of knowing what's ahead. But what I do know is that we are here. We're here now, we're alive, and we're sitting among others who are alive on Sunday morning. There is so much we can't control, and whether that is the lives of people we love or what's happening in broader society, but we can control ourselves to some degree. And so this time of the turning of the year is a time when many of us try to insert some more control over our lives, as Diana spoke of. Our New Year's resolutions, many lean into goals of changing behaviors or elements in our lives, or by leaving bad habits behind and making lots of promises to do new things. I kind of wish like I didn't have that embedded in me. I don't know about you guys, but I think like growing up in America, that's something that's kind of embedded in us, this idea of setting resolutions, that's kind of ingrained in me. And the older I get, I realize that this idea of self-improvement and setting intentions is important, and that we all need to do it at times in our lives, but we all have different rhythms. We have different chapters in our lives. We have different seasons. And so I do want to honor the fact that just because the calendar switched, this may not be that time for you. And I know, having been in a small group fairly recently, there are a couple people who really lean into this invitation of this season to take a week or a day or some hours and do some personal reflection, that it's a time that they have had in their bodies as a time to look forward to, a time where they give themselves that gift. So however you're feeling, it's all right. But I still think it's a good idea to talk about spiritual practices and setting intentions, whether you do that now or do it at another point in time. So Unitarian Universalists, we talk a lot about spiritual practices because that's how we live and fuel our own faith in the world. Susan Manker-Seal speaks about spiritual practices in a book called Everyday Spiritual Practices, and she says that spiritual practices are tools. They're not ends. And that they help us learn how to slow down, to pay attention, to focus, or to empty. I love that. And she said that they're not by definition spirituality itself, that the deep meaning of spirituality is breath. And breath is taking time, breath is the taking in of life-giving essence from the world, and then the release, in turn, of life-giving essence out into the world. So spiritual practice is really about slow down, pay attention, focus, empty, take in that life-giving essence, and in return, release that life-giving essence. Spiritual practices in our tradition are more about intention and attention. So instead of having the rosary or other kind of prescribed things, we'll kind of work on them on our own. I love this idea that one woman said, she said that like finding the right path is like standing in front of the candy counter and trying to decide which piece is right for you. She said, you know that it all depends on your taste, and you need to know what you like in order to choose the best piece for you. So that means you have to at least have tried some of them to know which ones you like. And even then, it's important to acknowledge that others may find different pieces more to their liking. So I do think this idea of pushing ourselves a little bit to try things on occasion is really helpful. I have one person in my life who keeps saying he can't meditate. And I'll tell you, I'm not super good at meditating myself, but I can find little moments, like even if it's just a breath or a moment before journaling where I am kind of moving into that meditative state. So I think to not necessarily throw that baby out with the bathwater, but to sample things, to taste them. So I would say the first thing spiritual practices do is they help us stop. They remind us to kind of come back into our bodies, to quiet our minds, to listen to our hearts, and they help us reset our interior lives when they are in need of a reset, which feels like happens, I don't know, for me more than I care to admit. So they help us slow down enough to like listen to our inner wisdom, to the holy, to God. They help us to live our lives with intentionality, and often they help us create connections to others and beauty and grace and the universe or our ancestors. So in that same book I referred to earlier, Everyday Spiritual Practice, Barbara Wells defines spiritual practice as her life as eclectic spiritual practice. And she is like, which I appreciate, and I want you guys to hear this because I know a lot of you may not be like me with my little systems in the morning. She said she goes against the prevailing view that spiritual practice is like exercise. She said it's for many, they think that it has to be consistent, a daily regimen, or our spirit will wither and die, because this belief is so common, she said. So I want you to sort of realize that although spiritual practices can be a great remedy, to not end up with them in this mode of perfectionism. They're never graded. They're not even judged, except perhaps by your own inner critic. They should be an invitation and not a chore. Although counter to Barbara, I do say I have to like set that time up for spiritual practices, because if I'm not fired up, I can still go into them. So it doesn't make it a chore, but for me, I've decided to make it a commitment with some consistency. So this morning, just a little reflection. Everything felt a little off. This is when I'm talking about that reset need. As I mentioned, we came back from Florida last night. We came home late. We had opened our house up to some neighbors' relatives who live across the street. So they were in our house while we were gone. We have this really irritating application that tells us whenever our car comes and goes from our garage. So during our whole vacation, it's like, oh, they're going with our car. Oh, they're coming back with our car. It was very odd. And it was interesting how this sort of generous heart stance I had prior to our vacation, where we decided to be so hospitable and hand over our house keys and our car keys, switched to resentfulness and some anxiety when I noticed footprints on the dining room floor Oh, they must not take their shoes off. And I noticed coffee rings on the kitchen counter. Gone were those spiritual practices that I shared early. Instead, on these Sunday mornings where I usually wake up early, I came down this morning and Linda had already taken our youngest son to the airport, so she was in the kitchen cleaning refrigerator shelves and asking me about frozen items and whether the cream had to be thrown away. And I found myself between last night and this morning so far from grounded or centered. So I knew I needed to relocate and to reset. And for me, it's just about taking time to stop, to acknowledge all that swirling that's going on in myself, to breathe. It's kind of amazing for me how much just like a couple breaths can really shift energy. And then just to give myself some silence before I turned to what I needed to get done. And I did actually find my way back to a place of calmness and openness. Thank goodness. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are this morning about, how do you recognize when you're coming off center? Ooh, we see a hand already in the corner. And, sort of what behaviors or feelings arise, and what spiritual practices do you use as a way to stop and return your body to quiet, or to quiet your mind, or to listen to your heart? So Polly, I see a hand up over here in the corner. It went up.
Hi, my name is Polly. Music is my spirituality. There are certain songs, and I have this wonderful iPod at home that has over 5,000 songs on it. And there are many of them that my brain goes to refuel. Bruce actually played one this morning. I think it's called Gymnopede, if I'm saying it right.
Was it the first or the second song?
The first song.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And somehow I am able to go into the song and like play it within my body. Everything else goes away, all my problems. And it's this feeling of almost empowerment, I know when I'm off kilter, when I can't do that.
Yeah.
Overwhelmed is bad for me. And when I feel overwhelmed, I am not centered at all. But that's it.
Thank you, Polly. Does anybody else have, I see Jamie's hand up.
I'm Jamie. I have a new hobby, coloring. And I find that this is very calming and focusing, but in a gentle sort of way. And yet it also requires a little problem solving, like what colors am I going to use and put together and so forth. And I used to do scrapbooking about 20 years ago and haven't done that in a long time. And I used to talk about being in the zone. That would just so focus my attention. I later found out that's called being in the flow.
Yeah.
And other people who did it, and sometimes we did it in a group, could talk about that too. So it could be both social and very much of an individual kind of practice. Now, I don't get to that depth with coloring, but it is just a very peaceful kind of experience.
I've definitely heard you refer to it on numerous occasions, so it's doing something.
Yeah.
Yep, because you bring it with you,
Well,
like
just let me know if you want to see my creations.
Okay, excellent.
Another spiritual practice.
Thank you. Linda, is anybody online?
I'm not seeing any hands. If I'm missing anybody, feel free to unmute yourself and speak.
Here? It's also just fine to keep all of those thoughts and ideas just in your own heart in the morning. So somehow, So many of us have inner voices or critics, perhaps, that live within us and feed our own inadequacies, fear, pain, anger, alienation. These parts of our lives, I believe, live and thrive without any intervention. And I do believe spiritual practices can be that invitation, that way to open us up to other ways of being and other sources that can potentially override those voices or messages inside ourselves that get in the way. We can gain access into our own inner wisdom or to that of someone or something greater than ourselves if we make space to do so. I don't remember if you guys remember a video from a long time ago. It was Valerie Carr. She was talking about birthing. What was she birthing? Hope, was it, or something? It was so beautiful. She's a lovely speaker. And she wrote about that. She said, I believe that deep wisdom resides within each of us. Some call this voice by a different sacred names: Spirit, God, Jesus, Allah, Om, Buddha, nature. Others think of this voice as the intuition one hears when in a calm state of mind. Whatever the name we choose, listening to our deepest wisdom requires disciplined practice. She notes that the loudest voices in the world right now are the ones running on the energy of fear and criticism and cruelty. And she says, but I must not lose myself at the feet of others. My most vigilant spiritual practice is finding the seconds of solitude to get quiet enough to hear the wise woman in me. Did you note that? She didn't say she finds hours or days or weeks of retreat and solitude. She said she finds seconds of solitude. Seconds. She continues, here's what I've discovered about the wise woman within. Her voice is quiet. I have to really get quiet in order to hear her. How do I know when I'm hearing her voice? She is tender. She is truthful. She's not afraid of anything or anyone. She does not give me all the answers, but she does know what I need to know in this moment. To wonder, grieve, fight, rage, listen, reimagine, breathe, or push. We sing a lot of songs about finding that still small voice inside and connecting to a greater universe. So I'm wondering about how you create that space in your own life. How do you find the way to quiet enough to listen to that still small voice inside, or else to connect with the wisdom of other sources available to us when we kind of enter as seekers into this world? Does anybody have ways that they crack open that space or give themselves that gift of space? Kevin.
Hi, still Kevin. For me, a lot of trauma in early life left me often the voice traumatizing or thinking, standing at a corner and thinking, what if a car hit me? And so I'm in this point now where I'm coming to hear it, to stop it. And that, the first step is to hear it and to stop it. And it's changing the body. It's relaxing me as I traumatize less.
So you're calling it out. You're really like saying, nope, not today. Yep.
And it's surprising to me how I have to call it out, that it's been so long pervasive.
Yep.
That it's a discovery of how to stop that tension.
Yep. That trauma lives deep within, doesn't it? Yep. Thank you, Kevin. How about you all back? Oh, yay! I'm so curious about life when,
My name is Kira, and I was going to say that sometimes, I don't know, oh, this is weird. Sometimes just taking a bubble bath,
Yeah.
just to kind of take a moment. I've also learned breathing techniques that really help me, like when I feel like I'm starting to get into that almost panic mode or the tension starts coming up, like if I can slow down, and I've learned a few different breathing techniques.
Can you
like-
just share them? Can you just sort of
Yeah.
talk about what the pattern is that you do?
Yeah, so there's like there's box breathing. So it's the inhale for 4, for the count of 4, hold it for the count of 4, then exhale for the count of 4, and then hold that for the count of 4. So it's almost like a box, if you can imagine.
Yep.
Um,
Inhale, hold, exhale, hold
Yep.
for 4 seconds.
Yeah, and just as long as, I mean, even just like 1 minute, if you can take the time to even just do it for 30 seconds, it really does, I feel like it makes a huge difference for me.
Yep.
And like Kevin said, like, it is just a matter of kind of noting that you're feeling that way, because if you don't realize you're feeling stressed or the tension, then, you know, it's just like you can't really do anything about it. So just like kind of acknowledging that it's there,
Yep.
and then using whatever technique you can do to calm yourself. So yeah, I
Yep.
don't know. I thought I was gonna say something else, but now I can't remember.
Oh, well, if it comes back, there'll be another time. I mean, I do think that when that crispiness shows up, you know, sometimes it's like, okay, it's the box, right? Like, let's just
Yeah.
find a way to get away long enough to.
And the second technique I just remembered, so there's one where you will inhale for, say, like 5, and it gets longer as you go. But then you want to exhale for longer than you inhaled. So you'll inhale for the count of 5, then exhale for the count of 6. And then you can go up as you go. This is kind of a yoga technique that I've kind of learned through doing yoga and stuff, but it really it slows your heart rate, it slows your adrenaline, all of those stimulants
Yep.
that are in your body that are telling your body to run, to fight, all these different responses that
Yep.
are just the really core part of our brains that can really just slow that down.
So I'm assuming one of the big parts is like what Polly said, is remembering to do those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you teaching any of the kids any breathing stuff or not at this point?
I mean, probably just through
No?
probably just through like them seeing me do it, you
Yep,
know?
yep, absolutely. We model a lot. Up, Aaron, I see Aaron's hand up.
Hi, my name is Aaron, and I live in a very different household than Kira does. When, for me, I don't really breathe. I don't breathe very well. I don't do a lot of those things very well. When I do get my opportunity, though, it's at this time of year specifically. It's getting outside and scraping my driveway. There's something very rejuvenating about getting the ice one little bit at a time, cleaning it off, and watching it kind of move and go. And with that, seeing some of my angst or anxiety is kind of scraping up off the driveway at the
That's
same time.
awesome, both real and metaphorically. And how hard last winter must have been, given that situation, yeah, yeah. Kevin's volunteering his. Thank you. Linda Sue, anybody there?
No, I don't see any hands up at this point.
So these tools we call spiritual practices, they help build lives that have more intentionality. That's really why we do it. I think that's actually why we even bothered to come together here or be part of a faith community, is to build in more intentionality. That slowing down, that connecting with our bodies and our interior lives, asking for help from our inner wisdom or the universe or even from others, can help us move away from that operating on that autopilot, or just being reactive in our lives. So a few years ago, when I was part of a collegial group, this kind of speaks maybe a little bit to what Jamie was talking about. We created vision boards. I don't know if anybody does that, but I hadn't really spent time doing such a thing before. Our collages were cutouts with words and images, and I didn't do one this year. I've done 2, and I can actually feel that loss. It's an interesting activity to try, perhaps, at this time of the year, if anybody has such things as magazines or such. But what it did for me was it reminded me about what I wanted to focus on the year ahead. And I also included things that I knew would be part of my life, so that it wasn't just I want all of this to happen when really I have, two major things in my life that are going to take up over 50% of it, so to be kind of mindful of that in the center of my vision board. As a person who spends a lot of time with like books and words, I found like this creative endeavor just really liberating, and it was a powerful way for me to shift from those lists and writing into a creative display of intention. So if nobody's done those before, we could think about doing them as a group. If you're interested, you could let me know and we could pull together a Saturday afternoon or something. But I just want to also call in the creative arts, whether that's knitting, I know we have some knitters, or coloring, or whatever. I think it also is a helpful way to enter into that flow, that zone. So are there things you do on a regular basis? I'm not talking about every day or anything, or annually, or even sporadically, which help you connect with intention. And what does that look like in your life? Are any of you folks who do something like that? So not like a day-to-day thing, perhaps, but a once a year, a couple times a year, a little fine-tuning along the way. Polly's up. Polly's got the hand up. Hey, Linda, Sue, anybody online?
Nope, no hands up here.
It's online. Let's see it.
I get to go twice because nobody
Yay.
else said anything. I have a crying candle. It was a candle of Kathleen's, and it has red shiny glass on the inside, this cup. It's a glass cup, and then a frosty white coating on the outside with the reindeer, not Rudolph, they're classy reindeer, and they're kind of etched out of the fogginess. And I light it every Christmas day, and I cry, sob, for probably 40 minutes. And it amazes me how cleansing that is. Every year I do it. It's a weight off of my heart.
Polly. What a beautiful example. Okay, I can see there's something about today. Did somebody else have a hand up while I was here, or was it just, nope, maybe it was Matilda. Oh, yep, I know, I thought so, perhaps. The other thing I was going to add, and now I see like time is just flying away today, I don't know what's happening with that, but is Lectio Divina as well. I did bring a poem that I thought we would work together with, but since it's late, we won't do that. If people want to come to the group afterwards to do the little checkout, we could spend a little time with this poem, the Sparkle Checkout. Lectio Divina is when you like choose a text, and it could be a poem, it could be a sacred text, and just read it a couple times with just an open heart and see what kind of calls or stirs in you. It's a lovely way to begin journaling or just begin some time of silence where you have other images coming in. All right, Bruce, I think we're going to have to just rock and roll now. We're going to move to hymn 1008, which is When Our Heart is in a Holy Place. And just like before, we'll have the hymn leaders up here. We'll have people at home muted, so please feel free to sing along. And those of you, please feel free to rise in body or spirit.